Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars. Topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
GSMC Basketball Podcast, right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. Obviously, we're here for wherever we're talking about basketball and what we can talk about. Today's show today, a very opinionated show today. We're going to do a very opinionated type of show. A lot of opinions, a lot of thoughts, stuff like that. You know, I'm gonna talk about a lot of different things, just a lot of things that are just NBA questions. You know, like what makes a good organization? How can you separate a superstar from a star? Why I think being a small forward in this game is more important than being a point guard in today's game. How has the Big Three era ruined the league, and also comparing the NBA now to the NBA before. We're gonna talk about all of that today on the podcast. Obviously, as you know how we do on this show, I like to start you guys off with some general news and notes that if anything comes out of the NBA to report to you guys. And I got a couple of things for y'all. And we're going to start with this. The NBA has now started an NBA horse contest. It has been talked about for a minute. ESPN has been trying to work with the NBA on it. They have people who they finally created, you know, everything working out, and I think it's good that this works for them, and I think they're happy for it, because obviously ESPN's looking for content. They're looking for something to put on their channel, because obviously there's not a lot that they can put that's not a rerun. So they're always still looking for fresh content. It's going to be Sunday, April 12th at 7 p.m. Mark Jones will serve as the official guest. So that's what we're looking at right now. Now, the contestants. It'll be Trae Young from the Atlanta Hawks going against Chauncey Billups, retired NBA analyst. Tamika Catchings, WNBA Hall of Famer, versus Mike Conley Jr. In the next group, Zach LaVine versus Paul Pierce. Zach LaVine from the Chicago Bulls. Paul Pierce retired. Going into the Hall of Fame this year. Congratulations to him. Chris Paul versus Ali Wigley in the second group quarterfinal. And then they will continue Thursday to have the quarterfinal encore presentations before it, and then after it, the semifinals, and then the horse championship game. So obviously, if that's something that excites you, there you go. You got you some basketball content. Obviously, it's headlined by Chris, Trae, Tamika, big names, guys like that. So I think this is pretty. I think it's going to be pretty exciting. You know. So there you go. There's some news in terms of content that could be coming to your television soon when it comes to the basketball game. Also, Bulls. Reported earlier, looking for someone to run the show. The Bulls have hired the Nuggets GM to be their new head of basketball operations. So they're looking for him to put this team into the right direction. And, you know, it could really help. Obviously, you've seen what he's done with the Denver Nuggets and how he's built that team. So I'm sure Chicago fans are very excited for this hiring, having a guy they feel like can really put this team in the right direction. Chicago's one of those teams that has a lot of young talent, so it'll be interesting to see who he thinks is worth keeping and who he might want to let go of. I think that's going to be very interesting to see. Like I said, he has a very good track record. It's a multi-year deal. And listen, some of the things that he'll also control. He'll also be responsible for hiring a new general manager for the team and reconstructing the front office. So clearly, like I said, there's things in place for him to be successful. He's going to run the show. Only 48. He's built his way up. And it looks like he'll be able to do something. He's turned the Denver Nuggets into what some people consider a contender in the Western Conference. So obviously they're hoping to move this team in the right direction and for them to be successful. So I think that's going to be a more interesting thing to look at moving forward, since he has been labeled a guy who is expected to save the Bulls franchise and put them back into the right situation. Also, with the NBA in a pause right now, obviously this is going to count a year on some guys' contracts. If they did cancel the season, obviously they would go to a free agency. They'll go not right into free agency, but they're going to have free agency, right? So obviously players are going to finish out on teams that have a year left or so, or options in their deals, have to make a decision if they're going to stay or not. One player that's talked about his future is Serge Ibaka. He's talked about he said he would like to stay. He would like to be a part of this team long term. He feels very comfortable with the Toronto Raptors. Obviously, Toronto has given him a lot of success in his career. He has absolutely no reason to not want to stay there at all. You know, he's a guy who fits what they do very well, and he does a lot of things that they've needed him to do for them for a very long time. So obviously, it'll be interesting, if they did cancel the season, how that affects free agency. Think about some players who were on a 1-year earn-it deal, they might have played decent this season, but they were maybe their team was in playoff position. They were going to be able to play big minutes and show in the playoffs they could play, something like that. How would it affect teams with that? Like, how would it affect a guy like Carmelo? How would it affect a guy like other guys who are on 1-year deals with teams? How is it going to affect their free agency if teams are interested or not? Imagine if you've had injuries and you're healthy and the season stopped. You maybe felt like, if I stayed healthy for the rest of the season, maybe I could have showcased some stuff. Maybe if I was healthy, my team was making the playoffs, I could showcase some stuff. It does make things a little weird, makes things a little dicey, but it's just all part of the game. So, Serge, like I said, he says he wants to stay in Toronto. So, and I think he should. I think that'd be his best place right now for him to do. But obviously, Serge is a veteran that any young team I definitely could see picking him up if they wanted to, because they know the type of They know the type of player he is and the type of success he can bring and leadership he could bring to this franchise. So obviously that's going to be an interesting situation there. Also, KG. KG also was elected into the Hall of Fame this year. KG, Hall of Famer, says he wants Seattle Supersonics to come back to the Seattle. He wants Seattle to have a team, but he said the Seattle Supersonics should come back to Seattle because obviously, remember, Seattle lost a team to Oklahoma, and people have felt like Seattle deserves another basketball team. They feel like they have the people to support them. Obviously, that's something that's been in discussion for a while. Obviously, if they did add a Seattle team, that would bring the league to 31 teams, which then would kind of it would be one of the first leagues that have kind of an uneven number, because Seattle was a Western Conference team before they left, and now if they make that change, they'll be probably a Western Conference team again. So you'll have now 16 Western Conference teams and 15 Eastern Conference teams. And I don't know how that might affect, the balance of the NBA, knowing you have a more Western Conference team than Eastern Conference teams. And obviously you have to adjust that on the schedule. Okay, now we got to fit them in there, so we may have to take one team off a year in terms of a game off a year from a certain series to accommodate the Seattle Supersonics, and you can maybe see the NBA trying to add maybe 2 teams if that's the case to keep it even. But that's all we got today in just general news in the NBA. Coming up next, I'm going to talk to you guys what makes a good organization in the NBA right here on the podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we talked about some general news around the league. I discussed the NBA creating a horse tournament, which they're now going to broadcast on ESPN Sunday night at 7, which is the quarterfinals. Obviously, this will be very exciting. Just to give some more content for basketball fans, some new, fresh content instead of reruns all the time that every sports channel is basically doing. And basically, going from there, we know all the participants. I've already mentioned that. If you missed it last time, you can tune back for that. We also talked about KG wanting the Seattle Supersonics to come back to the NBA. I talked about how that could create a challenge because now you'll have an uneven balance in the conferences if you did that. So they might have to bring back 2 teams potentially. And also the Bulls hiring Nuggets GM to be their basketball VP of operations. Now someone who built Denver into a winner now dealt with the task of building Chicago into a winner as well. So, now, we're going to get to my theory. We're going to get to the discussion. We're going to get into an opinionated conversation. Some of you are going to agree with me. Some of you might not. My concept when I do these things is to present something to you to make you think, okay, maybe he makes a good point here, but he doesn't make a good point here. It's okay. We all have opinions. That's completely fine. I just am going to break down to you this segment. And then for the rest of the show, just think my opinions on certain topics that have been mentioned in the NBA circles, in just, comment circles, blogs, everything like that. And just things that also I think, is out there that needs to be discussed. And the first thing I was going to talk about was what makes a great organization. Some of the great organizations in the NBA now are Toronto. I think Indiana has a very good organization. Golden State, obviously, has been for the last decade, especially since 2015, last half of 2010s, a great organization. Spurs, obviously, have been known as an elite organization. And obviously, we've had some teams that have had pretty bad organizations. The Kings, the Knicks are 2 teams that everybody kind of thinks of first. Cleveland, when LeBron's not there. I mean, even when LeBron was there, it wasn't a great organization, but LeBron saved it. But when LeBron's not there, you see what Cleveland is as an organization. And I just want to talk about what I think makes a great organization. I think first you have to have an owner who gives coaches, front office, players all the materials they need to be successful. You have to be willing to show you can invest into these guys to be successful. And that doesn't mean you have to give input into who they should sign and who they should trade. I feel like as an owner, you should not have your hands in that because you hire a GM and a basketball operations guy to handle that for you. Why are you hiring guys to do that job if you're just going to tell them what to do anyway? No, yes, they're the owner, so they could have what they want, but that just makes me feel like you don't trust them. They always say James Dolan has a big hand in all the player decisions a lot of the time because he wants to be a part of the situation. When he hires a GM, he wants somebody to work with him. And that's why sometimes decisions that have been made from a player perspective haven't always been the best. Because he may see something and want something, and the GM may see something else, but he's the owner. He's going to get what he wants. That's the key. The first key to me that creates a good organization is the owner supports his team, puts them in the right place, and then lets the guys that he hired do their jobs. An organization I think is up and coming is the Atlanta Hawks. The Atlanta Hawks have never had a bad organization. It's just since the Atlanta Hawks have never had sustained basketball success, we've never viewed them as a great organization. But when the new ownership came in, because they had ownership issues this past decade, the old previous owner had gave away the team. Then that next ownership gave away the team 2 years later, and then the new owners came in, Tony Ressler and other people that agreed to buy the team. One of the first things they did was remodel State Farm because Phillips Arena was an old arena. Let me tell you, living in Atlanta, Phillips Arena was probably one of the, I don't want to say the worst, but one of the most least up-to-date arenas in the NBA. So they renovated, upgraded that. Clearly, that's for fans. That's for the fans. That's for the people who work there to give a better environment, a more up-to-date environment, a more smoother environment. Second, they work with a hospital in Atlanta named Emory. Emory is a very big hospital, a very big time hospital. They work with them to create a training center, a healing center for the players. So now the players can train there. They can get all of their health needs taken care of there. Obviously, they're working with Emory. You know, they can get fed there. There was a tour of them. If you haven't seen that tour, go look for that tour of their training facility. Top of the line training facility. Because you got to make sure the players are taken care of. You got to make sure the players have everything they need to be the best players they can be and maximize their potential. It also shows as a player and to other players around the league, they care. So if I go to this team, I know they're going to take care of me and they're going to put me in the best position to be successful. Because if you get a reputation because of the ownership that you don't take care of your players are going to be a little nervous about playing there. And then, like I said, letting the coaches coach, letting the GM work, not making them feel this internal pressure that I want this guy, you need to give him this guy. Now, obviously, you might tell the owner we're going to go with this selection, but you don't want that pressure of, okay, well, I don't want him, I want someone else. You know? So, but I think the ownership's the most important part because if the ownership is on you and not letting you do your job to what you want to do to the fullest, and that contributes to a bad product, it's easy to sit here and just say ownership. Now, second, I think it's very important to have a good GM, head coach, VP relationship. It's funny because you hear a general manager and then you see head of basketball operations. Well, a head of basketball operations controls a lot of things surrounding the basketball team, including the players. The GM is usually GMs are specifically dealing with players, player contracts, coaching, coaches. Obviously, VP makes those final decisions, but obviously it's a position that I kind of look at in the NBA. You work with both. You got to make sure everybody has a very clear chart of work. Like, some head coaches want to be involved in the personal decisions. Some head coaches just want to coach. You got to make sure that's established. What is this relationship? Some GMs want to work with the VP. Some GMs want to work by themselves. Same thing with basketball operations. He may not want to work with them. He wants to make decisions on his own. Or whatever responsibilities he has, he wants to make decisions on his own. And it's just important to make sure there's clarity between everybody. And then if y'all do have a working relationship, that it's healthy. That it's not, I want him, screw you. It needs to be, okay, I want him, this is why, but I understand why you think he would work for us. And then, you talk it out. It's like a discussion. It's just like business discussions. You're just discussing stuff. When you discuss it, then you can maybe come to a conclusion or a decision on what's the best case scenario for the team. When you try to have a head coach that has all the power, problem is they have no one that's telling them, especially if the owner doesn't get involved, if what they're doing is wrong. Sometimes having that relationship can stop a certain decision from happening because something may be brought to your attention you never thought about. It's just good sometimes to have those many voices talking to you because you need to know what's the best decision, what is going to be the best decision moving forward. You don't want to just think you're always going to be right. You don't want to be, I guess, egotistical and think everything you do is correct and right, because if you do it, you'll end up like the Knicks or you'll end up like the Kings. Even though the Kings, I think, have a growing organization, it's just there's some, owner and some stuff going on there. But like Toronto and them, they have that great relationship. Masai Ujiri controls everything. He makes the decision. Nick Nurse just coaches. It works. That's why you're seeing the same success for the Toronto Raptors. Even with Dwayne Casey and Masai Ujiri, it was the same thing. That's why they've always, product-wise on the court, always been a good product. And I think, that's why I think it's important to have that clarity when you're running an organization. That's what makes a good organization run very well. But that was my spiel. Now I'm going to get into my next question. I'm going to answer this podcast next segment. How do you separate a superstar from a star? Right here on the podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we did talk. I discussed and gave my opinion on what makes a great organization in the NBA. I discussed it all the way from the top down to the bottom. How it's important to have clarity. You gotta have clarity of what everybody's role is. If it's going to be a very collaborative or a very sectional, you do this, I do that, we just come together when it comes to certain decisions, but everybody just does their own thing. Or is every decision we're making within this organization going to be a group effort? And also how important it is for ownership to, I feel like usually as an owner, you are a businessman, not a basketball expert, football expert, so to say. So, or whatever own league you have, and you hire people to do those jobs for you. So your job is just to make sure you give the coaches, the front office, and the players anything they need to maximize their success and for them to be successful. Because if you don't, that can sometimes ruin what happens within the organization. Like if you're very hands-on as an owner trying to get into personnel decisions and etc., how that can sometimes go awry and actually hurt your team instead of helping it. But now I'm going to get into the next topic. What is a superstar and how can you separate it from a star? It's a very interesting question in this league. I think people realize we only have a very few amount of superstars in this league. Obviously, people come to mind: Kawhi, LeBron, Greek Freak, Giannis, But what? How do you How do you know as a player? Because listen, in the NBA, a star can get the same money as a superstar. I mean, literally, how they determine if you get the supermax is if you make one of the All NBA teams. But sometimes an all-NBA team player isn't a superstar, they're just a star. So I'm going to talk about how you can separate the both and how you and what is a superstar. So I'm going to discuss, I'm going to attack the question of what's a superstar first. To me, a superstar is a player that makes, whatever he does makes the team better. And what I mean by that is this. So if you think about Jordan, his reputation, he was very mean to his teammates, punched a teammate, very rough on them. Also, reputation, most clutch player in the league, one of the best scorers we've ever seen. I think Jordan, the reason why he was a superstar to me was when you play with Jordan, you know, if we do our part, Jordan can take us home. It's a dependence and a trust that players have in you of knowing if we're close, he can get us over the hump. Usually, star players can sometimes do it, but the other half can't. Superstars get you over his hump most of the time. Unless you have a player who just specializes in being clutch. A la Jimmy Butler. And so, LeBron is a superstar, but he impacts his players and his teammates by getting everybody involved and trying to put them in the best positions to make the best play for them to be successful. Like, think about it. He's a gifted passer. That's why you put shooters around him. He can then give it to shooters. If you make your shot, you're going to get maybe 5, 6, 7 attempts a game because of LeBron. Just at the 3-point line. Because of the opportunities he can create. And if you are hit shooting from a high clip, not only is you helping the team win, you're helping yourself. Giannis helps the team because since he's so dominant and so great, teams are so focused on stopping Giannis, the other players, especially in Mike Budenholzer's system, takes advantage of that and the opportunities because they know, listen, if you think about their team, nobody thinks there's a true star on their team outside of Giannis because Chris Middleton is an all-star in people's opinion. So you focus and think, well, if we don't let Giannis beat us, or if we can stop Giannis, we don't think the rest of the team can beat us. But that's where the biggest strength can come for them as a team because, remember, these are NBA players. They're not just scrubs. Obviously, yes, the team may run through Giannis, and that's when they're at their best. But it puts players in position to be even more successful because now they're going to be called upon to make more plays to showcase their talent. Superstars, to me, basically what I'm trying to say, impact the game in different ways. They change the game in different ways. They make their teammates better in different ways. Not all the same way. Kobe didn't make his teammate better the same way LeBron did. Some people may say Kobe didn't. But everybody impacts differently. A star to me is a guy who you need him to be good, but there's almost an unsureness when in the biggest situations when we need him to be good, can he still be that good? Like, think about some guys who are stars in this league that have question marks. Like, think about the Joker. Joker. One of the best centers in the league. But people think he's not a superstar center like maybe a Joel Embiid because, well, when you need a bucket or you need a play to be made in big pressure situations, especially in the playoffs, because that's what we dictate most of these guys off of in the playoffs, is Joker really someone you look at as a person and think, yeah, he can get the job done? I'm not saying he'll never have a game where he won't do it, but is he someone you can trust and reliably believe he can get us over the hump? Is he the reason why we win every game? You know? people say that about Jimmy Butler. I believe he's a star. A guy who definitely can win, can score, can play defense, can do a lot of things well. But he's not a superstar. I think that's why you look at Miami Heat, you don't think it's Jimmy Butler and then everybody else. It's the Miami Heat squad, and just the biggest name is Jimmy Butler. They play a very team-oriented basketball system. Every team plays a team-oriented basketball system, but there are certain teams that you just know Miami's going to beat you because everybody had a good night, or most of the players had a good night, and everybody played well together. See, LeBron can see superstars too. Could just take over a game where all the other teammates just got to give the bare minimum, and he'll take the rest. He'll drop 50, 60. Just give me the bare minimum. Play some defense, guys, and we'll win this game. Jimmy Butler, you don't look at, or Joker, you don't look at, or Ben Simmons, you don't look at and think, all right, we need 60 tonight, and then the teammate's gonna give you the bare minimum. You don't look at them like that. There's just a difference. That's how, yeah, a guy may be super talented, but does he get you over the hump? And especially in a league where it shows superstars control this league. If you don't have a superstar player, you're usually never competing for a championship, legitimately in the running. The three teams that people consider NBA Finals contenders are the Bucks, Lakers, and Clippers. All of them have a superstar player or two. Lakers, you could say they have two. Clippers, depends on how you feel about Paul George. Giannis, we know there's a definitive one player, which is him. Outside of that, who else in this league? I mean, you got the 76ers. The 76ers have a borderline superstar player in Joel Embiid, but he has injury issues and etc. And Ben Simmons, people thought he had the potential to be a star, but he's really just to me, he's just a good player. Until he develops a jump shot, I don't think he'll ever be a superstar. I mean, he has the ability to be a star. It's just, he does so many other things well than shoot. I could see why you call him a star. But if you see how limited his game is, that's why you could never trust Ben Simmons to be the guy to take you home. Ben Simmons, I think, needs a wing superstar to work with him. That's why I don't think him and Embiid worked. But basically, my point is, superstars, they just impact the game differently. They can take you home when you need it. And stars, they can't. They can't do it in the biggest situations all the time. And so that was, how do you separate a superstar from a star? And now next segment, I'm going to talk about more positions. Obviously, they say today's NBA's position is basketball. And I'll talk, in this segment's why. I'm going to talk about why being a small forward is more important than being a point guard in today's league.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, I discussed with all of you people what separates a superstar from a star. You know, I just broke down the superstar impacts the game differently. There is a trust that teammates have in him where you just know if I do my part, I believe every night we can win because he is so reliable and he usually does his part. Like every game with Kobe, you expect Kobe to almost drop 40 a game. You expect LeBron to have a triple-double or close to 25, 8, and 8. You expect Giannis to almost have 30 and 10. It's an expectation. You just believe it on a night-to-night basis. Stars is like, yeah, he may average 22 points a game and 8 assists, but there may be more games where he don't show up and other games where he does. And it's very 50-50, where as a player, you still feel like, yeah, he's a star, but I got talent too. I can be just as supporting as him. Where a superstar, you know, like, he's the guy. You know that's the man that's going to be the reason. And now I'm going to talk about why I think the small forward position is more important than the point guard position. And I know this may seem like a weird topic, and I'm really going to really talk about positionless basketball here. But what my point is this. Think about the last decade. Think about all the teams that won a championship that had an elite point guard. There's only one. That was Golden State Warriors with Steph Curry. Tony Parker was a very good point guard, but he wasn't elite. Mario Chalmers was above average. Van Fleet and Kyle Lowry, good players. I mean, Kyle Lowry's an all-star. But he wasn't no elite point guard. No one's ever looked at Kyle Lowry as that. And I mean, I guess the other person too who's elite was Kyrie Irving. So out of this decade, only 2 teams with elite point guards won a championship. Now think about all those teams, and now think about the small forward, just a natural small forward coming into the league. Because sometimes we get to the position as basketball, and now we don't think they're small forwards anymore. Like, no, small forwards. Miami, LeBron. Golden State, when they got Kevin Durant. Toronto, Kawhi. I mean, even though Kawhi wasn't the guy in San Antonio, you could even say that a little bit. I mean, there wasn't that many champions this decade. I mean, the only team this decade that really had a shooting guard was their best player was when the Lakers won because of Kobe. So I named you 3 small forwards. Obviously, Golden State won for a while, so obviously that's the reason why, there's not as many small forwards. But my point is this. Think about the best players in the league. Giannis, Kawhi, LeBron. Small forwards. Those are your top players. Where you have the occasional elite shooting guard, which I think a lot of people think the shooting guard is going out of, style, but, think about a small forward. Think about a guy like that. I think that position is what created positionless basketball. Because small forwards are kind of like that perfect player where they're like 6'8", 6'7" to 6'10", 6'11", but still just as athletic as point guards, just as fast, just as quick, but bigger and stronger. And then if they get a jump shot, now they're bigger than you and can shoot over you or get past you. They're usually, you would think, better defenders. Where if you think about a point guard, you think, okay, can they pass? What is their vision? Can they run an offense? Are they a scoring guard or are they a setup guard? A guy who can set the team up? Can he shoot? Russell Westbrook kind of changed the game because he was a point guard who could rebound, pass, score, block. He's changed the point guard. The point guard position has been revolutionized. Don't get me wrong. But I feel like the small forward position has created positionless basketball. Because think about it. Think about a guy like Giannis coming into the league. He basically played point guard for the Milwaukee Bucks. Especially when Eric Bledsoe or George Hill's not on the floor. Even when they're on the floor sometimes, he takes the ball off the floor like a point. LeBron plays point guard for the Lakers. And honestly, if you said you had to go with these guys as your point all year, that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. So, I think what the position has done is that since you have a position that can have all those skills in just one player at one position, it creates this positionless basketball. It really does. Because think about this. Think about the teams now. Obviously, we all know. Lakers, Boston, Milwaukee. Eric Bledsoe, I guess, I mean, if we put LeBron as natural position, I guess what, Rajon Rondo? And who's the Clippers? Patrick Beverly. We consider them either average, above average, or good point guards. Even though point guards touch the ball more than any other position, because they're usually the ones taking up the floor, that's why everybody considers them one of the most important positions. Now think about teams that have elite point guards, like teams like Oklahoma City with Russell, Kyrie Irving when he was just by himself in Cleveland or by himself in Boston. Think about all the teams who their best player was their point guard, and think about how far they've gone. A lot of them don't get out of the semifinals of their own playoff series, of their own playoff conference. Half of them don't make the playoffs. But the elite small forwards, usually, they're competing up there. Like I said, it's not a huge number, so don't get me wrong. But it surely makes a difference. It surely makes a difference. I think the point guard position is the most perfect Robin position that you can have if you talk about Batman and Robin. Because if you have a solid point guard, one of the top point guards in the game, and then you have a solid other position, I think that point guard is a great Robin because he handles the ball a lot. And so you have a guy, as soon as you come up the floor, he's dangerous. And then you still have that other star player you got to deal with. You know? Like, think about the Dallas Mavericks. That's the reason why Kristaps and Luka are going to be such a great duo. Because Luka's a point. And he's one of those revolutionary points. He's 6'8", 6'7", playing point guard. And he can shoot and get to the rim. If you think about that, that seems like an impossible guard. But then think about KP. Power forward, center guy. Power forward, center, wherever you want to put him. Stretch the floor, shoot the three. I mean, they're the two revolutionary today's NBA point guard and big man. They have all the potential, if they get on the same page and maximize, to be one of the best duos in the NBA for the next few years. I know we like to look at everything and says everything has to end in the championship, but trust me, Dallas will be competitive with those two. But even if they didn't have a point guard, let's say they traded Luka for just a top flight shooting guard, it would still work. Literally, anybody can play point guard. That's the crazy part. LeBron plays it. Giannis plays it. James Harden played it before Russell came. Bradley Beal plays it. I mean, literally, point guard is such an interchangeable position. You don't even have to be a natural point guard to play point guard. That's why you hear so many people say you really have a two guard playing point. The point guard back in the day was so defined. You knew what a point guard was. You always had a point guard on the floor. Now you can just have anybody, if they have ball skills and can pass, or even if they're just great scorers, that can play the point guard position. And to me, that's why the game has become so positionless. And mainly it's came from guys from the small forward position. Think about Jason Tatum. He's a small forward. They probably could say, hey, Jason, we need you to play point guard for the next quarter. And he would do it flawlessly. Because that's just how the NBA has changed. And that's why I think in today's NBA it's more important. So, that's that spiel. But coming up next, has the Big Three error ruined the NBA? All that more right here on the podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment I talked about why small forward, or just if you want to say wing defenders or wing guys, are more important than the point guard. Because literally anybody can play the point guard position now. Point guard is so interchangeable now. But also because think about small forward guys. They literally can be the total package. Honestly, Luka Doncic could be a 3 if he wanted to. He has the size and everything. He just has kind of a frame that you may be like, but he could play the 3. That's why he can guard 3s and 4s. He's like 6'9", 6'10". Playing in point, but can guard almost every position. That's why LeBron's so effective. He can guard every position. But I feel like it just all starts because if you have that prototypical small forward frame, you literally, if you have the skills, can do anything on the court, any position on the court. Or point guard, if you're a true point guard, you have point guard skills. And that's why you play that position and do point guard things. And now we're going to get to a question that's been debated in a lot of circles for the last decade. Ever since it really started with LeBron, even though Boston was the first team to do it. Has the Big 3 era ruined the NBA? Some people will get tired of all these players joining together to build a super team and then they're going to dominate the league for 3-4 years. We've seen it with Miami. We've seen it with Golden State. Boston, even though they won one championship, they were always literally there every year. And to answer that question, I have another question. Why is it bad for all these players to join up? Now, we talk about competitive balance. And I think competitive balance is needed. But I think the thing is this. The league has always ran its best on dynasties. I think when you think about the concept of a dynasty, it's a team that you expect to win every year. So people I think, well, if they're going to win every year, then what would be the point of me watching this sport if I know who's going to be there? But people don't think about the other arguments. We assume they're going to win. But there's a chance they could lose. And if they lose, it'll shock you. It'll shock everyone. If let's say, that's why when Golden State was probably down 3-2 to Houston, everybody watched that game. Because they were like, are they going down? Are they really going to do it? Are we really not going to have Golden State win? It creates that compelling storyline of Goliath being slayed. That's why I don't think the Big 3 era has. I think it's actually helped the NBA. We've had the Big 3 era literally throughout the last decade. And what are we about to do with NBA contracts and TV money? Get even more. More viewers. Increase in viewership. There's more and more and more. Because of those errors. And I think people don't think about that. I don't think people think about that. Because you don't understand the anticipation of wondering if a big time team's gonna go down. Think about Patriots Super Bowls. Those games are very highly watched because even though you hate the Patriots, so you want to see them lose. You want to see them fall. You want to see them falter. Yes, it'd be nice if they wouldn't even make the playoffs, but imagine them losing on the biggest stage time after time and time after again. It would be more satisfaction. You would feel so much better if your team was the team that took them out. Golden State, like I said, was the last team that you felt that way about. Like, oh, I can't wait if some team can beat them. It's gonna be more of a story. It's gonna be more of a wow. It's gonna make more people want to watch. So the Big Three era hasn't hurt the league. I can understand the concern. You don't want a team that you just know year after year after year after year is going to be good and be there and probably always be in the championship hunt, if not around or in the NBA Finals itself. But it's what makes the league compelling. I think about the 90s. The Bulls won 6 championships. So 6 out of those years, more than 50% of the decade, they were the winners. And I bet you after that first championship, everybody knew they were going to win. But we could say the 90s basketball became extremely popular because of Jordan, because of the Bulls. And there was other great teams too. The thing is, people don't also think about those underlying stories. Teams trying to build teams to one day compete with that big team. All these teams trying to make moves, trying to adjust their teams, trying to make changes, trying to draft certain players, hope they hit a superstar, things like that. If you think about all these teams, there's always a star player on these big dynasty teams that were drafted. Chicago, Jordan was drafted by Chicago. The Spurs, they drafted Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili. Boston, they drafted Paul Pierce. I don't think they drafted Paul Pierce, actually. Actually, I think they did draft Paul Pierce. I need to check that. But if they did, they drafted Paul. They drafted Paul Pierce. The Miami Heat, they drafted Dwayne Wade. Golden State, they drafted Curry and Clay. If you notice the theme, that's what other teams try to emulate. We need that star player. We may get a better player than the star we have in free agency, but we need a star here. We need a core guy who has been here, and he's the guy that got the city interested in the first place. You have teams out here looking for their next LeBron, looking for their next Jordan, looking for their next Giannis. Think about the league this year. Zion Williams is one of the most popular players in the league. And we know the Pelicans aren't competing for anything. But then think about this. What if the Pelicans get another superstar player and then they're able to compete for NBA Finals? And let's say they're going to be the juggernaut team for the next 2-3 years. You're going to watch. You're going to hate and you're going to love. If the Pelicans fail, you're going to be happy and be glad you watched it unfold in front of your eyes. And because you want to see them lose, you're going to watch it if they win. Just to see could they lose. So if you think about that, the Big Three era has not ruined the NBA. We just, in the mindset of fans, we just think if you put all of the best players on one team, why should I watch? Why does that sound appealing to the human mind? If you told someone who does not know anything, if I said I'm going to put the 5 best people on one staff, and then we're going to have 5 other companies with maybe one good staff, an average and whatever, an average staffer, a great staffer, a good staffer, and then they said, which company do you think is going to continue to win the best company? You're going to say the person who has all the great staffers. But what if one year they didn't win? That's what the other 4 companies are working for. Trying to develop the staffers who may be average, below average, into great staffers. Because then it'll feel more organic because we weren't them, but we were able to beat them. We were able to get to a point where we could beat them. And then it makes them feel good. Everybody who works for that company feel good because it shows even if it doesn't look good or doesn't look like this person is going to be at the top of the line or anything like that, it's not impossible. It's not over. It's not. There is plenty there. There really is plenty there. And so I think the Big Three era has helped the NBA. I truly believe that. It's just the Big Three era has helped the NBA in ways we never truly thought about. That's the big thing. They helped in ways that we actually didn't sit here and think it would help the NBA, and that's what made them great. So that's all we have on that segment. And now my last segment coming up next, we're going to talk about today's basketball compared to old 90s, 80s basketball right here on the podcast.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, I discussed that the Big Three era hurt the NBA. And I made an argument saying that it actually helped the NBA. It's just helped in a way where you don't see it till it plays out. And then you realize it actually helps you become more invested in the product yourself than you realize. Because think about the highest eras of NBA basketball have always been with dynasties. It's never been where every year you don't know who's going to win. Like this year, if you think about today's NBA, we think there's only 3 teams, maybe 4, that could win it. But what is one thing I've heard consistently throughout the year is that NBA ratings are down. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? Ratings goes up every year with the Warriors dynasty. But it's down in a year this year where we actually have a little bit more, who's going to win. You think there's more storylines. But for some reason, it's not translating in ratings. Obviously, there's other things that affect that, but we'll have to see. Obviously, playoff ratings are going to be the big deal, too. So, and now we're going to get to the last segment of the show where we discuss old basketball to new basketball. Obviously, people who grew up in the old days are going to maybe view this differently, obviously, because they believe their era was the best, and they feel like everybody's soft and can't defend today, and then everybody's there was like, no, well, y'all were slow, or y'all weren't as athletic, y'all didn't have the type of players we had today, so y'all wouldn't be able to survive. Listen, we're going to talk about it right here, okay? We're going to get it all in the open right here. So, obviously, older basketball, there was not as many rules in terms of defense. You could hand check, you could be more physical with players. So that could alter shots, you contesting. Obviously, it was known that you could be a little more violent on the court if you had to be. Where today's NBA, you feel like you breathe on someone's a foul. Here are some cases I want to make for both sides. For the new day NBA. Now, listen. You have to think about this from a defensive standpoint. Basically, the question a lot of people who watched older basketball say no one can defend nowadays. Well, you have to think about this. Back in the day, everybody was pretty much mid-range shooters, 2-point guys in the paint. Traditional big men, which means they could not stretch the floor. They were literally slow and they were in the paint all the time. Today's NBA, you have big men who are more athletic, can shoot the three, they can come off picks. They can do a little bit more skillfully than big men could back in the day. So if you think about that, yeah, we can say defensive rules make a difference, but think about it. Who would ever think you gotta chase a 7-footer off screens? That never happened back in the day. You never had to chase a 7-footer off of a screen. Think about it. Mainly, you had guys who could shoot threes, but usually that was, again, I felt like basketball back in the day was very, very clear cut. if you can shoot a 3, you're a 3-point shooter. If you have a paint, if you score in the paint, that is what you do. You score in the paint. That's it. And if you could play defense, you play defense. If you're a point guard, you play point. Like, you run the team. It's very clear cut. Where today's NBA, like I said, you have a 7-footer who can hit threes off screens. You have point guards who can be small forwards. So you're putting a 6'2" guy on a 6'8" guy. No matter which area you in, that's a mismatch. You have guys who we could say, are more athletic than they were back in the day. And so, why wouldn't it be harder to defend that? Why wouldn't it be harder for that to be defended? Like, legitimately. Why would that be harder for that to be defended? Like, they make it sound like, also, I think a lot of people look at what Steph Curry's done to the game too, and evolutionized the 3-point game and made the 3-point shot so important that now you're watching a lot of games where a lot of teams are jacking up 43s a game. Where before, on a good day, 23s attempted on a good day. Back in the day, if you would get up early, like in the 2000s, if you got up like 23s, that's a good amount. It feels like in the 90s, if you got up at least maybe 15 to 10, that's a lot. Where now 40's a lot. 20's like, okay, a little bit. And with that, and then you got guys who can shoot from half court, and just the range and the skillfulness of every player at every position nowadays is so much greater to me than it was back in the day. But when I say that, I'm not saying nobody back in the day could do it, though. Because there were so many players that could do and be versatile and do that. But they were very few. So yeah, you may have, that's why that team that had that player usually had a mismatch or had the disadvantage. Because they had a guy who could do that. But everybody else was pretty clear cut what they were. So, where now everybody is versatile and can do multiple things. So yeah, it's going to be harder to defend in the NBA. You got people that talk about, oh, I don't like the fact everybody's friends nowadays. I mean, you got to think about it. Back in the day, it seems like from what I've heard, a lot of players traditionally just did basketball traditionally. You played it when you were a kid, you played in middle school, you played in high school, you played in college, you went to the NBA. And even though you might have went to some camps, because I'm sure camps existed, you really never developed relationships with other players growing up. So when you got to the league, you had all these other players you were already cool with, and you already had history with, and were friends with, and then you met them when you got into the league. So then what happens is then your mindset was like, oh, I don't even know this guy. I'm trying to prove I'm better than this guy. I'm going to prove I'm the best player here. That's why rivalries and stuff happen a lot. Because even though they still got to know each other through the game, it wasn't like they had a certain relationship with them beforehand. I mean, even in college. Because remember, they didn't have cell phones back then. So it wasn't like, hey, let me get your snap. Let me get your number, bro, and I'll text you or something like that. Legitimately, once that game was over, you did not speak or see them probably until whenever y'all had to be in a mutual room together. So, of course, there was more competitiveness between everybody. Because you're hearing, imagine if you're at home and you're a good player and you keep hearing people on TV talk about this other player. You're going to be like, I'm better than him. I'm going to prove it. Where now you're growing up with guys who you know they're good. They know you good. Y'all appreciate each other's game. Y'all want everybody to be successful. So then when you get to the league, it's like, well, I want you to be successful because you my boy, and you want me to be successful, so why should I hate you? That's why you see so much friendships now. And guys hooking up and working out together. Because from the minute they got into the game, they never had that ability to have to create distance between other good players. Think about players who do that now, like a guy they say who does that is Russell Westbrook. Unless he plays with you, he kind of distances himself from you a little bit. Because to him, it's not as important to establish those relationships. But I'm sure he grew up with these guys and have respect for certain guys and like certain guys. It's just in his game, it's not as important to make that for that friendship to be shown. I do think, obviously, it made for more compelling television, clearly. Back in the day, the storylines were better. Where now, when you're watching TV now, you're just like, well, it's elite player versus elite player. But back in the day, it's like, Magic and Larry, they don't like each other. They're trying to go for a championship. This is going to be good. So I can understand that. I can understand that perception. I honestly feel like with this question, it just depends on the way you grew up. If you grew up in an era where that was the norm, then you're going to prefer it. Think about it. People growing up in this generation now are going to look at the way NBA's play and think, what's wrong with it? We have so much access to each other now. It's so easy to get in contact with people and make relationships out of it. So I'm not surprised the NBA is the way it is now. Doesn't make it worse. If you go off numbers, it's popular. But it just depends on what fits your cup of tea. I think both eras were great in their own right. Both eras brought something to the table. If we didn't have the 90s and 80s, we wouldn't have had 2000s and 2010s. So everything has its own unique taste and unique feel to it. Let's not compare it together and try to say one is better than the other. But that's all we have here on the GSMC podcast. I was your host, Brice Lewis. Thank you for tuning in. And don't forget to listen to our other amazing shows that we have here on the GSMC podcast. Don't forget to follow us on social media. And thank you and have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.